I'd like to thank Liz and Andreas and Jan for inviting me here today to talk to you. I'll be speaking about two projects. The first project I'm going to talk about is July the 12th, 1984, which was completed in 2003. And the second project is titled RIP and is currently in development for production later this year for exhibition in 2012-2013. On June the 11th, 2001, Timothy McVeigh, otherwise known as the Oklahoma bomber, was executed. McVeigh's act of terrorism is second only to the 9/11 attacks in the number of people murdered by terrorism on American soil. Prior to his execution, there was a fierce debate within America about who should have access to witness his execution. Originally, there was a plan to have the victims' families watch the execution through closed-circuit television and/or through an encrypted internet website. As the federal government were anxious about hackers and the use of any recorded material either by the right-wing fundamentalist homegrown militia movement, who saw McVeigh as a patriot, and the left-wing freedom of speech campaigners who believed that if the execution were to be broadcast, then Americans who wished to have access to this material should have access to this material. Because the federal government were unable to ensure complete security in their endeavors, they decided not to broadcast or record McVeigh's execution in any electronic form. As part of this debate, National Public Radio, America's only non-commercial broadcaster, held an open forum about the broadcasting of executions and the death penalty within American culture in general. In the spring of 2001, I was working in Oxford. As habit dictated, I spent the long bus ride reading the newspaper on my way to work. On the front page was an article about the radio station WNYC, who had the night before broadcast, as part of the NPR-hosted discussion, audio excerpts from executions carried out by the state of Georgia. Risking their broadcasting license and opening themselves up to criticism from all corners of American culture, WNYC and the oral history-driven organization Sound Portraits Productions, through NPR, held an incendiary discussion using illegally recorded material. It's still illegal to record any execution in the United States. To use this recorded material in order to open up discussion about the deeply questionable morality of capital punishment within the United States. Just a word on Sound Portraits. Sound Portraits Productions is no longer producing oral histories. They were an independent production company dedicated to telling stories that brought neglected American voices to a national audience. Whether on radio, in print, or on the web, Sound Portraits was committed to producing innovative works of lasting educational, cultural, and artistic value. If you get a chance, go to their website. It's a fantastic oral history website. Anyway, in broadcasting this program, WNYC risked losing its commercial advertising base. NPR and Sound Portraits risked having their nearly non-existent yet essential public funding cut. Copies of the execution tapes, as they were known, were smuggled out of Jackson State Prison by an unknown prison guard and entered the court records when criminal defense lawyer Mike Mears subpoenaed the tapes in a lawsuit he brought challenging the state's use of the electric chair. Mike Mears then brought them to the attention of David Isay at Sound Portraits, specifically for broadcasting purposes. Of course, it's ironic to note that the state of Georgia illegally recorded all of their executions since the reinstatement of the death penalty in the late 1970s. Although they knew that this was unlawful, their claim in doing so was that the recording could prove that they were following the proper procedure in carrying out the letter of the law in regards to the death penalty. On that spring morning, on my way to work, as I read about the broadcast the evening before, I was feeling a series of very complex emotions. I'd always been appalled by the death penalty and gone on marches against it when I lived in the States when I was younger. Previously, I'd made work that tried to deal with ideas of the death penalty. I made a scale model reconstruction of the gallows on which the murderers Dick Hickok and Perry Smith were hung. Hickok and Smith were famously portrayed in Truman Capote's novel In Cold Blood. Anyway, I wrote a letter to David Isay, seeking permission to use the execution tapes within the construct of an artwork. Although I was still unsure of what it was I wanted to do with the material, should I be granted permission to use it, I knew that I wanted to try and make something from these records. Within 2 weeks of writing the letter, I received a package in the mail. The package contained all of the recordings smuggled out of the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, with David Isay's personal blessing. I was very overwhelmed by this act of generosity. So much so I telephoned David Isay. I had not spoken to him, I'd only written him a letter. And I asked him why he'd given me this material. And he replied that he wanted the recordings to be used and brought to different audiences, and he had a feeling that I would remain sensitive to the original material, retaining the integrity of the documents. They say, be careful what you wish for. Once I received the material, I was stymied as to how to proceed. It was all too powerful as it was. After a considerable period of time, over a year in fact, I realized that I couldn't alter the material at all. It was through sitting down to transcribe a particular execution that I realized that the language, the words in themselves that I heard, were nearly as shocking as the act itself. The language, trying to communicate murder as it was happening with banality, was nearly as staggering as the act of murder. Once I realized this simple truth, I was then sure how to deal with the potency of this material. My film, July the 12th, 1984, is made from the actual audio recording of the execution of Ivan Ray Stanley. I've removed lengthy pauses, and that is all. It's not been re-edited or altered in any other way. We hear a prison guard, Willis Marable, describing over the telephone what he can see, which is, of course, what we cannot see. Willis is not seen by anyone in the execution chamber. He's in a mirrored booth, unseen and unheard by all who are present in the building. He's on a party line, an open telephone conversation, speaking to the governor of Georgia, who you can hear sounds like he's having a party in the background, and the state and district attorneys. As they're unable to see what's happening before them, Willis Marable tries hard to be descriptive. July the 12th, 1984 is an artwork document that depicts government-state murder.